welcome back to the Locke Pick. For this special interview report, we'll be talking to Volbeat Fyro, another Nuzlocke artist, and I sat down to interview him on this Nuzlocke. So, when did you first get into Pokemon, and what was your favorite aspect of it?
I've been a fan of Pokemon since I was a young kid. However, I was just a casual fan. It was just something you play light on and off. That was until a few years ago. Around 2009, 2010, found a competitive Wi-Fi battler on YouTube. Went by the name Hayden. When you see how complex Pokemon is played competitively, then that's when you can really appreciate the game. It has simple enough of a system that young kids can play through the game easily, but complex enough of a battle mechanic that older fans can enjoy and make a lot of strategy out of. That's what I like about Pokemon the most. It's accessible and rewarding and designed in such a way that pretty much everyone of any age can enjoy it in different ways.
This Hayden he mentions is a competitive battler that you can find videos of on YouTube. He's definitely a good competitive battler, but some of the stuff he talks about...
What is going on, guys? Welcome back to another Wi-Fi battle. This time I finally got a new team together. I've been working on EV training this whole team for quite some time now. Finally got it all together. Everything's different except for Mustachio. On his side of the team, he has a Gliscor, which looks, it could put a hole in my team, so I got to worry about taking that thing out. In this game, this turned out to be a really good game, so yeah, let's do this. He leads off.
It just goes right over my head, honestly. I guess I'm not really a competitive battler. But ironically enough, he also does a few Nuzlocks, which is what you're here to talk about. But first, what do you think makes Pokemon so popular?
Like I said earlier, I think the combination of accessibility and reward for both young and old is the main appeal to Pokemon, because it pretty much can have a fan in all ages.
What do you think makes the Nuzlocke so popular?
Now on to the Nuzlocke. While the competitive scene is where the challenge is for older fans, the gameplay through the story has only gotten easier every generation, leaving older fans unchallenged through the in-game battles for the most part. This is what made the Nuzlocke notion so popular, I believe. It made progressing in-game a real challenge for older fans, because with the Nuzlocke challenge, there can now be permanent consequences if you mess up in a battle. Due to, if one of your Pokemon faints, you have to consider it dead and release it or put in a death box or something. Furthermore, the Nuzlocke challenge encourages you to try out and experiment with new Pokemon. This is because of the encounter rule. You can only try to catch the first Pokemon you encounter on each route. So if you happen to get unlucky and run into a Bidoof or something, that means that's the Pokemon you have to try to catch on that route, and if you fail, you can't get anything else there. So you have to make do with what you can get, and this really encourages players to try out a lot of Pokemon they've never tried out before. When you have to make do with whatever Pokemon you can get, instead of just, say, hunting down your favorites and ignoring all the other ones, this really helps you appreciate a lot more of the Pokemon, and I feel this really helps make the Nuzlocke challenge a lot more popular.
Where did you first hear about the Nuzlocke challenge, and how did it appeal to you?
I actually forgot where I first heard about the challenge, to be honest. Though I assume it was from a Nuzlocke playthrough of Hayden's. I can't be sure. The main draw of the challenge to me, though, is the comic community for it. I love seeing how others interpret the same challenge in games in their own ways, and what they choose to emphasize in their comics.
So can you describe the basic story of your Nuzlocke, or Nuzlockes?
My Nuzlocke Odd Ones is a combination of both comedy and very serious dark moments. It's about a trainer named Eric who just wants a humorous fun journey, but he gets dragged into a struggle against a dictator molding Unova into a dystopian society. There's a combination of trauma, fourth wall breaking, and intense villains of massive scale throughout the comic.
What makes your comic stand out from other Nuzlockes?
What I feel sets my comic Odd Ones apart from other Nuzlockes is the peculiar combination of over-the-top humor and very grim situation. In addition, all I take from the gameplay for my comics are the route catches and the general chain of events in the game. The in-game plot I throw out the window. I take as many liberties as I can in making a thorough layered plot of my own revolving around my Nuzlocke run, and I even add several characters that aren't even in the gameplay into the plot to mix things up.
What inspires your art style?
I actually have no idea what specifically inspires my art style, so I couldn't say. There's probably a lot of unconscious inspirations I'm using, and I know what inspires my writing styles and tones, but as for art style, I just do what works for me.
What do you think attracts people to your Nuzlocke?
I think the main draw for my comic is probably a lot of the humor, but I know the plot is there to help entice viewers too, so it's more than just humor to it. Plus, I update pretty consistently, and that's a good draw for readers.
Who are your favorite characters in your own work and why?
Most who have read the Odd Ones comic can tell that one of my favorite characters in the comic is Aoshi the Leaveney. I really enjoy him due to how responsible he is in the comic and how he ties Eric's whole group together, and he was also really dependable in the in-game playthrough. Leaveney are really helpful Pokemon in this game, and it was nice how early I was able to get a 3-stage fully evolved Pokemon. Due to how Swadloon evolves into Leaveney, I was able to get a Leaveney really early in the game because I knew how to exploit the happiness mechanic. I just drove around on the bike for about 30 minutes, and boom, max happiness, and I was able to get a Leaveney as early as right after the 3rd gym. And getting a Leaveney this early in the game really helped me out of a lot of tough situations where I could have lost a Pokemon or I could have lost other teammates. And since he was so dependable in-game, this ended up being the inspiration for my characterization for him in the comic. And that's how I just really ended up enjoying this character.
What's the hardest part of doing a Nuzlocke challenge?
The hardest thing I think about doing the Nuzlocke challenge is following all the rules to the T. As there's no one there to supervise or enforce these rules on you, and there's no way to code it into the game, it's very tempting to just give yourself another chance by resetting from the last save. But breaking rules like this defeats the purpose of the challenge. I broke a few technicalities in the Odd Ones playthrough, as it was the first time I did the challenge, but then I ended up making these rule-breaking instances into plot elements for the comic to emphasize how it's a really bad idea to not follow the rules. As you break little rules here and there, they're going to add up, and it's just going to dampen the whole challenge and the whole purpose of doing a Nuzlocke in the first place.
And what's the hardest part of making a Nuzlocke comic?
There's 2 things in particular I feel are the hardest things about making a comic, at least in my eyes. The first is consistently updating when you have so much else going. That's a given. The other thing is the difference of expectations to reality in regards to your comic. Basically, you will always underestimate the time and comic panels it will take to complete a plot element, and it can take a lot longer than you plan to complete and progress through events. A few moments of in-game can turn into a month of work for converting the scene into the comic.
Which death in your challenge was the hardest?
That would be a plot spoiler if I answered this, since Odd Ones isn't complete. But as of where the comic is currently, I'd say Io was the hardest death of them all, as you can tell by how much I emphasize that moment in the comic.
How long do you see yourself making comics and doing these challenges?
I plan on continuing making comics for about another 2-3 years. 1 to 1.5 to finish up Odd Ones, then 1 to 1.5 years to complete the next and final Nuzlocke I plan on comic, Those That Shine. This Nuzlocke won't be a sequel to Odd Ones and is already being pre-planned as of right now, so it stays smaller and more manageable than Odd Ones when I get to it. It's hard to say for sure, but that's my estimate as of right now.
Any final thoughts?
To those that plan on making their own comics, I recommend planning as much as possible beforehand so you can manage the scope of the project and properly finish it. There's nothing more trust-breaking and disheartening in my eyes than seeing comics being abandoned due to the author losing the energy to finish or never updating out of the blue. And it's hard to regain fans' trust after you've done something like that. So just consider it more deeply before you start a comic.
It's hard to top that, but he brings up a very good point. While these Nuzlocke comics are amazingly fun to read, You really have to put a lot of time and commitment into them, as proven by all our answers to my lovely guest here. There's nothing sadder than coming across a comic and it's so amazingly drawn, so amazingly detailed, but then it just stops. But I think the satisfaction is all worthwhile when you actually do finish. And then you're crazy enough to start another run. But that's the cycle of the Nuzlocke. And I think it's a trend that will continue for a long time at least. Well, folks, there you have it. An inside look into the mind of a Nuzlocker. I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you next time. I'd like to give special thanks to my guest, Volbeat Fyro, for offering his input on the Nuzlocke comic, and additional thanks goes to Hayden for his participation. Music here provided by Alex Alexandrov with the song Tranquility. I'd like to thank me for doing all this editing. With special thanks to Jenny Hansen for teaching a wonderful class this semester.